The desert stretched endlessly, a barren ocean of sand and rock beneath the punishing sun. The highway ran like a scar across its skin, straight and lonely, with no sign of life for miles. Elena's car rattled along the cracked asphalt, coughing smoke from under the hood. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel, praying the old engine would hold on just a little longer. But the prayers went unanswered. A sharp pop, a shudder, and the car rolled to a dead stop in the middle of nowhere. Silence settled over the land, broken only by the faint whine of wind carrying dust across the road. Elena cursed under her breath, slamming her palms against the wheel. She checked her phone. No service. Of course, the nearest town was miles away. Her water bottle was half empty, her backpack light, and the sun already dropping toward the horizon. She stepped out, the heat slamming into her like a wall, and scanned the endless horizon. Nothing but empty desert. But then, just as despair began to claw at her, she spotted something in the distance. A faint structure, half hidden by heat waves. It looked like a house, maybe a ranch. With no other choice, she slung her bag over her shoulder and started walking. Every step crunched in the sand and gravel. Sweat stung her eyes, her throat dried like sandpaper. The house seemed to shift further away with each step. A cruel trick of distance. But slowly, painfully, she drew nearer. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching long and sharp. Finally, after what felt like hours, she reached it, a weathered ranch house. Paint peeling, windows shuttered, the wood gray and weary from decades of sun. A barn stood nearby, its doors chained shut with thick, rusting locks. The entire place looked abandoned, forgotten, and yet she felt eyes watching her. Elna hesitated at the porch steps. The boards creaked under her weight as she knocked on the door. At first silence, then footsteps. Slow, deliberate, the door creaked open. A man stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dust-stained shirt and a hat pulled low. His face was worn, carved with lines of hardship, but his eyes were the color of storm clouds, cold and searching. "You're lost," he said, voice deep, rough like gravel. "My car broke down," Elena explained, her voice shaking despite herself. I need to use a phone or maybe some water, please." The man studied her for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then he opened the door wider. "There's no phone here. Closest town's 20 miles. You won't make it on foot. Come in before the dark catches you." Something in his tone made her hesitate, but thirst and exhaustion outweighed fear. She stepped inside. The house smelled faintly of dust, oil, and old wood. A single lantern burned on the table, casting long shadows across the walls. The furniture was sparse, heavy, old-fashioned. A hunting rifle rested against the wall, polished and ready. He gestured to a chair. "Sit." Elena obeyed. He poured water from a tin jug into a glass and slid it across the table. She drank greedily, relief washing over her parched throat. "Thank you," she whispered. The man nodded once. "Name's Caleb." "Elena," she replied, forcing a smile. His gaze lingered on her, unreadable. "Not safe out here, Elena. Night brings things you don't want to meet." She frowned. "Coyotes?" Caleb didn't smile. "Worse." Before she could ask what he meant, a sound echoed from outside. Heavy footsteps. More than one. The boards of the porch groaned. Elena stiffened, eyes darting to the window. Caleb stood slowly, his hand closing around the rifle. He leaned toward her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his breath, and whispered words that froze her blood solid. "They're going to kill us if they know you're here. Don't move. Don't make a sound." The knock at the door thundered through the house. The knocking at the door came again, louder this time, rattling the wood against its hinges. Elena's breath hitched as she pressed herself lower into the chair, trying to make herself small. Caleb raised a single finger to his lips, eyes hard as stone. He moved silently across the room, boots barely making a sound on the old wooden floor. The rifle in his hands gleamed faintly under the lantern light. "Caleb!" A voice called from outside, deep, commanding, with the kind of confidence that belonged to men, who had killed before and would kill again. "We know you're in there. Open up." Elena's heart hammered so loud she was sure they would hear it. She glanced toward the window, but Caleb snapped his head toward her, a warning glare freezing her in place. The knocking stopped. For a moment, the night outside was silent except for the wind dragging dust across the porch. Caleb leaned against the wall, listening. His chest rose and fell steadily, but his jaw was tight, locked with tension. Then the footsteps retreated. The sound of boots crunching on gravel drifted away, fading into the desert night. Elena let out a shaky breath. Who were they? She whispered. Caleb's gaze stayed fixed on the door. Men you don't want to meet. That's not an answer, Elena pressed, voice trembling. Why were they looking for you? Caleb turned slowly toward her, his storm-gray eyes unreadable. You should leave at first light. But you just said town is 20 miles. You'd be safer in the desert than under this roof. His words sent a chill down her spine. She wanted to push him for more, demand answers. But something in his stare silenced her. It wasn't anger, but a heavy weight of knowledge, like a man carrying a secret too dark to speak aloud. The rest of the night passed in uneasy silence. Caleb sat by the window with his rifle across his lap, eyes never leaving the darkness outside. Elena lay awake on the old sofa, staring at the ceiling beams, every creak of the house making her flinch. At some point, she drifted into a shallow sleep, filled with restless dreams. When she woke, the first rays of dawn spilled across the floor. Caleb was gone. Elena sat up, disoriented. The house was quiet. On the table sat a plate of bread and a tin cup of water left for her. She ate quickly, nerves tightening her stomach, then stepped outside. The morning air was cooler, but the desert stretched as empty as ever. She walked around the side of the house, drawn by a nagging curiosity, and found herself standing before the barn. It loomed over her, larger than she expected. The wood was old and splintering, but the doors were secured by heavy iron chains threaded through thick padlocks. Strange symbols were carved into the beams, rough, uneven scratches, like someone had gouged them with a knife. She leaned closer, tracing one with her finger. It looked almost like an eye, or a circle surrounded by jagged lines. A low thump came from inside. Elena froze. Another thump followed, slow and deliberate, like something shifting in the dark. She stepped back, her pulse spiking. The barn looked empty, abandoned. So what was moving inside? Elena. She jumped, spinning around. Caleb stood a few yards away, his face shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. His eyes locked on hers, sharp and unyielding. Stay away from the barn. Her throat tightened. There's something in there, isn't there? His jaw clenched. There's nothing in there for you. Do you understand? But I heard... You didn't hear anything. His voice was firm, final. But underneath it, she caught something else. A flicker of fear. Before she could argue, the sound of engines rumbled across the desert. Elena turned and saw dust rising on the horizon. Trucks. 2 of them. Black and heavy, barreling toward the ranch. Caleb's face darkened. He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the house. Inside, now. They barely made it through the door before the trucks rolled to a stop in the yard. Doors slammed. Boots hit the dirt. Elena peeked through a crack in the shutters. 6 men stood outside, dressed in dark coats despite the heat. Their faces were shadowed beneath wide hats, but their movements were sharp, precise. Armed men, dangerous men. One of them looked straight at the house, and even through the window, Elena felt the weight of his gaze. Caleb, the leader called, voice carrying like a whip. We need to talk. Caleb stood in the middle of the room, rifle in hand, unmoving. Elena's whisper trembled. What do they want? Caleb didn't look at her. His voice was low, grim. Blood. And as the men began to spread out across the yard, circling the house like predators, Elena realized the chains on the barn weren't there to keep something inside. They were there to keep people like her, away from whatever truth Caleb was too. Afraid to say aloud, the men outside didn't knock again. They didn't need to. Their presence was enough. Elena crouched low beneath the window, her heart pounding against her ribs. Her palms slick with sweat. Through the sliver in the shutters, she saw them fan out across the yard, calm, deliberate, like they had all the time in the world. These weren't strangers lost in the desert. They belonged here. Caleb stood in the center of the room, rifle at his side, jaw locked in a grim line. He hadn't moved since the trucks arrived, hadn't spoken another word. He was listening, waiting. The leader of the group stepped forward. He was taller than the others, his coat brushing the dust at his boots, a black hat pulled low over his brow. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made Elena's blood run cold. You've been late, Caleb, he said. Very late. Caleb didn't answer. The man tilted his head, a smile flickering beneath the shadow of his hat. You know how this works. The land doesn't wait. The land doesn't forgive. Elena swallowed hard, pressing her back against the wall. She didn't understand the words, but she felt their weight. Every syllable dripped with threat. One of the men walked toward the barn, rattling the chains with his hand. The sound echoed sharp in the morning stillness. He chuckled. Still locked up tight. You keeping secrets, Caleb? Caleb's hand tightened on the rifle, but he didn't move. His voice, when it finally came, was steady. Leave. The leader's laugh was low and cold. Not until we've taken what's owed. Elena's stomach twisted. Owed. Blood. The words hung in her mind like hooks. She pulled back from the window, pressing her fists to her temples. None of this made sense. None of it should be happening. For hours they stayed outside, waiting, watching, like wolves circling, prey they knew couldn't escape. Eventually the trucks rumbled back to life, engines growling as they pulled away, leaving behind only tire tracks in the dust. Elena exhaled shakily. Who are they? She asked, her voice cracking. Caleb's eyes followed the horizon until the dust settled. Then he finally looked at her. The Syndicate. What do they want from you? His silence was sharper than words. He set the rifle down and moved to the kitchen, pouring water into a tin cup. The scrape of the jug against the counter was the only sound in the house. Elena's fear curdled into frustration. You can't just shut me out. I need to know what's happening. If I'm in danger? You are. Caleb cut her off, his voice low. As long as you're here, you're in danger. The finality of his tone left no room for argument. But the anger in Elena's chest wouldn't let her stop. When Caleb stepped outside, muttering something about the generator, she stayed behind, and she searched. She moved through the rooms quickly, careful not to make noise. Most of the house was bare, stripped of personality. No photographs, no keepsakes, as if Caleb had erased himself from the place. But in the study, buried beneath old ledgers and yellowed newspapers, she found a leather-bound journal. Dust clung to its cover, but the pages inside were filled with neat, cramped handwriting. At first it looked like an ordinary account book, lists of cattle, rainfall, planting seasons. But the deeper she read, the darker it became. April 12th, 1953. The earth cracked open, again near the south field. The men say it is hungry. They say it must be fed. Her breath caught. She turned the page. June 30th, 1954. We gave them 2 this time. The soil is richer already. The grass grows green where the blood spilled. The words blurred as her eyes raced across the pages. Names, dates, each entry colder than the last. Sacrifices. Always sacrifices. Her hands trembled. She flipped further. A final entry, the ink darker, smudged by a heavy hand. October 2nd, 1971. My grandson will inherit what I cannot carry any longer. The Syndicate will guide him, as they guided me. The land must live. The blood must flow. Elena's stomach churned. She slammed the book shut, her hands shaking so violently she almost dropped it. Her mind reeled with questions, with horror. This wasn't just superstition. This was ritual. Generations of it. The door creaked. Caleb stood in the threshold, his face shadowed, his eyes fixed on the journal in her hands. You shouldn't have read that, he said quietly. Elena's voice cracked. What did they mean, Caleb? What did your family do? His silence stretched like a noose around her neck. Finally, he whispered the truth she didn't want to hear. They fed the land. Her legs weakened beneath her. With what? She asked, though part of her already knew. His gaze was heavy, unflinching. With people. The words landed like stones in her chest. She staggered back, bile rising in her throat. A sound drifted from the barn. A groan, low and inhuman. The chains rattled softly in the morning breeze. Elena's eyes darted toward the sound, her body frozen. Caleb's jaw tightened. They'll be back tonight, and when they come, they'll expect me to open that barn. Elena turned to him, horror widening her eyes. What's inside? Caleb's face was pale, his voice broken. The ones who never left. Night fell like a hammer. The desert sky bled red into black, the last light fading behind the jagged hills. Elena stood at the window, every nerve in her body thrumming with dread. The barn loomed in the yard, its chains glinting faintly in the moonlight. From inside came muffled thumps, dragging noises, and something that sounded almost like whispers. She tried to convince herself it was just the wind, just her imagination, but the hairs on the back of her neck told her otherwise. Caleb sat at the table, rifle across his knees, staring at nothing. His face was pale in the lantern glow, his eyes sunk deep in shadow. He hadn't spoken much since admitting the truth, that his family had fed the land, that people had been given to it. Every time she looked at him, Elena felt her stomach twist. He wasn't just a stranger anymore. He was part of it, The sound of engines broke the silence, growing brighter as two black trucks barreled toward the ranch. Headlights cut across the desert. Elena's heart lurched. "They're back," she whispered. Caleb rose, his jaw tightening. "Get down!" The truck skidded to a stop in the yard, dust swirling around them. Doors slammed. Men spilled out, their silhouettes long and sharp in the headlights' glare. The leader stepped forward, his black duster billowing in the night wind. "Caleb!" His voice was a roar across the barren land. "It's time." Elena pressed herself flat against the floor, her breath caught in her throat. Caleb moved to the door, his shoulders rigid. For a moment she thought he might open it, might hand her over like some lamb to slaughter. But then he turned, eyes burning, and whispered sharply, "Follow me, now." Before she could protest, he yanked her up and dragged her toward the back door. They slipped out into the darkness, keeping low, moving fast across the dirt. Gunshots cracked behind them, bullets tearing into the walls of the house. Elena flinched, stumbling, but Caleb's grip was iron, pulling her forward. "They know you're here," she gasped. "They always knew," he spat. They darted toward the canyon beyond the ranch, the shouts of syndicate men echoing behind them. Flashlights swept across the desert, beams cutting through the dark. More gunfire snapped through the night, ricocheting off rocks. Elena's lungs burned as they scrambled down into the dry riverbed, gravel crunching underfoot. Caleb fired back once, twice, forcing their pursuers to dive for cover. The chase was relentless. The desert, vast and empty by day, now felt like a cage. Shadows stretched long, swallowing them whole. Every hill, every gully, every boulder could hide syndicate men waiting to close the trap. Elena's fear clawed at her chest, but adrenaline pushed her forward. At last they ducked into a narrow canyon, its walls rising high on either side. The sounds of pursuit faded slightly, muffled by stone. Elena collapsed against the wall, gasping for air. Sweat streaked her dirt-stained face, her hands trembling uncontrollably. Caleb crouched nearby, checking his rifle. His breathing was steady, too steady, like a man who'd been running from this his whole life. Elena's voice cracked. "You knew they'd come for me. You knew this would happen." His gray eyes flicked to hers, dark and heavy. It was only a matter of time. She shook her head, tears spilling. Why me? I don't belong here." His silence stretched until she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he whispered, voice raw, "Because no one leaves this land alive. Not unless the land chooses them." The word slammed into her like a blow. What does that even mean? Caleb stared at the canyon floor, his face etched with torment. "My daughter. She was 12 when they came. I thought I could protect her. I thought I could bargain with them. But the land doesn't bargain, it takes. They dragged her screaming into that barn, and I never saw her again. Since then, I've been paying, working, killing, anything to keep them from taking more. But it's never enough. It's never enough." Elena's breath hitched, horror seizing her chest. A child, his own child. The syndicate had devoured even that. From the canyon's mouth came the crunch of boots on gravel. Flashlights bobbed in the darkness. The syndicate was closing in again. Caleb rose, rifle ready, his voice low and fierce. "You can run, Elena, or you can fight. But either way, this ends tonight." Elena stared at him, her pulse pounding in her ears, and realized she didn't have a choice. The desert had already claimed her. The canyon walls seemed to close, in tighter with every step, the moonlight slicing narrow beams across the stone. Elena's lungs burned as she followed Caleb deeper into the winding passage, her body trembling with exhaustion. But the sound of syndicate boots crunching on gravel behind them kept her moving. Shadows flitted across the walls, flashlights cutting through the dark like knives. Somewhere in the distance, a man shouted orders, his voice echoing through the canyon like a hunter calling hounds. Caleb moved like a man who knew the land's every secret, leading her through twists and hidden paths, his steps sure and silent. But Elena's mind whirled with chaos. Every word he'd spoken since the barn echoed inside her skull. Fed the land, with people, his daughter. She wanted to scream at him, to demand answers he wouldn't give, but there was no time. Survival was the only thing left. Finally, they stumbled into a hollow carved into the canyon wall, a pocket of shadow that shielded them from sight. Caleb pressed her against the rock, finger to his lips. She held her breath as the syndicate's flashlights swept past, voices muttering in the distance. For a long moment, only silence pressed down on them, heavy and suffocating. Then Caleb leaned close. His breath was hot against her ear, his voice low, urgent. "Listen to me. You have to understand why they're after you. Why they won't stop. Elena's throat tightened. Why me? I don't belong to this place. I was just passing through. His grip on her shoulder tightened, cutting her off. His eyes burned with something she couldn't read, anger, fear, guilt. The land chose you. Her blood turned cold. What are you talking about? He swallowed hard, his face drawn and haggard. It's alive, Elena. This soil, this desert, it's not just dirt and rock. My family has known it for generations. It takes, and in return, it gives. Crops grow in the sand. Water flows where there should be none. But the price is always the same. Flesh, blood, life. Her stomach nodded as she shook her head. No, that's insane. Do you think the syndicate's just a gang? He snapped, voice hoarse with desperation. They're the keepers. The priests. They've been feeding it for decades, making sure it stays quiet, making sure it doesn't swallow everything, and now it's hungry again. Elena's hands trembled as she pushed back against the stone. So what, they want me as some kind of sacrifice? Caleb's silence was worse than any answer. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and blinding. Why me? She whispered, her voice breaking. His jaw clenched. He looked away, as if the truth itself was too heavy to face. Then slowly he leaned close again, his whisper colder than the night air. Because you bled on the land. Her breath stopped. Caleb's eyes flicked to her arm, where the bandage still wrapped the cut she'd gotten during her car accident, the one that had brought her stumbling to his door. The moment your blood touched the soil, it knew you. It marked you. That's why the syndicate came. That's why they won't stop. Elena's knees weakened, the canyon spinning around her. It was impossible, insane, but in her gut, she felt the truth of it sink its claws in. She remembered the way the dust had seemed to cling to her, the way the air had grown heavier when her blood dripped into the dirt. The land had taken notice. Her whisper cracked. So I'm already dead. Caleb's face twisted, pain etched deep in every line. Not if I can stop it. But before she could ask what he meant, the syndicate's voices grew louder. Flashlights bobbed at the canyon's mouth, beams slicing toward them. Caleb's eyes snapped to the light. His voice dropped to a growl. They'll try to take you alive. Don't let them. He raised his rifle, the steel glinting in the moonlight. And for a heartbeat, Elena wasn't sure if Caleb was her protector or her jailer. The first shot cracked through the canyon, and the night erupted in chaos. The canyon erupted with violence. Gunfire cracked like thunder, bullets sparking against stone. Elena threw herself to the ground, her ears ringing, her chest heaving. Caleb fired back with grim precision, every shot forcing syndicate men to scatter for cover. Dust filled the air, choking, blinding. Flashlight beams cut through the haze, jittering wildly as boots pounded closer. Run! Caleb shouted, his voice raw. Elena scrambled to her feet, stumbling deeper into the canyon. Her legs burned, every step a desperate struggle. Behind her, rifles roared, echoing like war drums in the night. The canyon walls funneled the chaos, amplifying every scream, every ricochet. She didn't dare look back. But the syndicate was relentless. A shadow loomed ahead, one of the men breaking from cover, knife gleaming in his hand. Elena screamed, twisting away as he lunged. The blade slashed her sleeve, tearing fabric, grazing skin. Pain flared, hot and sharp. Before he could strike again, a gunshot cracked, and the man crumpled at her feet. Caleb loomed behind him, smoke curling from his rifle. He grabbed her arm, dragging her forward. We can't outrun them. There's only one way left. Elena's chest heaved. What way? His face was pale, hollow, eyes burning with a terrible resolve. The barn. Her blood froze. No, you said... I know what I said. He roared, his voice breaking. But if we don't give it something, it'll take us all. The words struck her like a knife. He wasn't just talking about the syndicate anymore. He meant the land itself, the earth beneath their feet, the invisible hunger that had stalked his family for generations. The syndicate pressed closer, their shouts echoing off the stone. Caleb fired again, forcing them back, then pulled Elena toward the mouth of the canyon. The desert stretched out before them, silver under the moonlight. The ranch house, a dark silhouette in the distance, and beyond it, the barn. They ran. Across the sand, across the emptiness. The trucks still sat in the yard, engines dead, doors hanging open like gaping mouths. The house stood riddled with bullet holes, windows shattered. And the barn, its chains rattled faintly, as if stirred by something inside. Elena stumbled to a stop, horror rooting her to the ground. "Caleb, please, don't do this." He turned to her, sweat streaking his dirt-stained face, eyes wild. "It's the only way." The syndicate burst from the canyon, spreading wide, their rifles raised. They advanced in a slow, merciless line, boxing them in. Their leader stepped forward, his smile sharp as broken glass. "You've run long enough, Caleb. Open it." Caleb's hands shook as he raised his rifle, aiming at the barn instead. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The desert air was heavy, electric, like the ground itself was holding its breath. Then he fired. The padlock shattered. Chains slithered to the ground with a metallic groan. The barn doors creaked, slow and heavy, swinging open into blackness. At first there was nothing. Just silence, just shadow. Then the sound came, low, guttural, like the earth groaning awake. Shapes stirred in the dark. Something wet dragged across the dirt. And then, eyes, dozens of them, glowing faintly in the black, staring out into the night. Elena's scream tore through the silence. The syndicate froze, their confidence shattering in an instant. "No," their leader whispered, his voice trembling. Not yet, it wasn't supposed to be now. From the darkness of the barn, figures emerged, twisted, broken, human, once, but no longer. Skin gray and cracked like stone. Mouths stretched into silent wails. Their movements jerky and unnatural. The ones who had been fed to the land. The ones who had never left. The creatures surged forward. The syndicate fired wildly, but bullets barely slowed them. One man was dragged screaming into the dirt, another torn down in seconds. Chaos exploded across the yard. Gunfire, shrieks, the tearing of flesh. Elena stumbled back, her body shaking violently. Caleb stood at her side, rifle empty, his face stricken with both horror and resignation. "This is what I tried to stop," he whispered. His voice cracked, raw with despair. "This is what my family bound to this land. And now it's free." Elena's blood turned to ice. "You unleashed it." His eyes met hers, hollow and haunted. "No, we did. The moment you bled on this soil, there was no stopping it." Shoved Elena aside and swung his rifle like a club, smashing it back. "Go!" he roared. "Run!" But as she stumbled toward the open desert, Elena realized the truth. There was nowhere left to run. Not from the syndicate, not from the barn, not from the land itself. And as the night was torn apart by screams, one thought chilled her more than anything else. The land wasn't just hungry. It was awake. The syndicate is broken. The barn is open, and the land itself has awoken, hungry and unstoppable. Will Elena escape the curse, or is she already bound to the soil forever?